Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for joining this panel, for listening in. I'd like to welcome everyone who's listening in on the ESI Digital Winter for this half-hour session. I'd like to first of all thank Sam and the ESI team for inviting us to discuss the ESL Pro League and CSGO a little bit more generally. I'd also like to, as I mentioned, thank you everyone who's listening in, who wants to understand a bit more about the CSGO game, but also the development of the opportunity around the ESL Pro League project. My name is Alex Inglot. I am the commissioner of the ESL Pro League, and I've been in that position now for about 18 months. But I'll be leading the session, but I'm very excited to introduce three individuals who will be going through this panel session with me. The individuals are Ulrich Schulze, who is the SVP of Product ESL Gaming. We've got Patrik Sättermon, who is the Chief Gaming Officer for Fnatic, one of the teams that are in the ESL Pro League. And then Daniel Finkler, who is the CEO of Berlin International Gaming, who are one of the newest members of the ESL Pro League. So we've got three different perspectives on this project on the CSGO space. So with those introductions out of the way, I'd like to start with just to create a little bit of context to the ESL Pro League, understand a little bit of the history of esports and CSGO more specifically. I'm honored that in Ulrich and Patrik, we've got some of the OGs of the space, two individuals who have been involved in CSGO for 10, 15 years, perhaps even more. Ulrich, I think you've been involved in ESL since 2007. Patrik has been involved in competitive CSGO first as a player, just from around at the same time, and who now obviously works at Fnatic. So I just wanted to start with you two, if I may. Perhaps maybe let's start with Patrik. We've come a long way in esports and in CSGO since 2006, 2007. I would love it if just to kind of get everyone into the mood and understand the evolution of this space. Could you just give me an overview of the most profound changes that you've really seen and experienced in the ecosystem over those last 15 or so years?
Sure. Thanks for having me, Alex. I think it's borderline impossible to even compare it. I mean, speaking from a former player that began with competitive Counter-Strike or playing Counter-Strike in the late 90s, actually 99, and starting to kind of travel, attending some of the tournaments actually that Ulrich's company ESL hosted back then, but also other stakeholders, right? You know, highlights or lowlights would have been like, you know, zero standardization of rules and experiences. You can go from like Spain one day and then go to a tournament organizer in China and you have completely different rule sets. So try to apply that in sports. And suddenly you play football, for example, and the pitch is smaller or bigger, or maybe even you play 60 minutes versus 90 minutes. Those things happen a lot. The ability to, you know, watch it was non-existent. In some cases you could, if you were really good with computers, if you really had the right setup, you can follow the tournaments from maybe a chat client or the game itself. But streaming actually came way later, you know. So yeah, people like myself and Ulrich and Fnatic and ESL and some of the early movers, let's say, was a completely different ball game. It was a bubble, if you may, before we even talked about bubble events. But you had such due to the lack of kind of technology and broadcasting softwares.
Thanks, Patrik, for that kind of view from the team's point of view. In terms of ESL, you know, Patrik already talked about ESL's position in this space for, you know, almost since day one, really. So, Uli, I'd love to get your perspective as a tournament organizer. How has things evolved from your point of view, and how have you seen the last 15 years evolve?
Yeah, I think that there's been some key changes, and I mean, the biggest thing for us is probably if we look back 10 years, 15 years, then you typically have esports happening alongside an existing event, so at a CeBIT or at a Gamescom, but rarely on its own as its own separate event. Players were mostly playing in the back, so players being on stage is actually not something that was there from the beginning, just because the infrastructure wasn't there. So on stage you'd have the commentators and maybe a screen, but the players would be somewhere in the back. And now obviously the change that we've seen, especially in the last, I would say 5-6 years, was that we can now fill arenas on our own, that the players are on stage, that they can interact with the audience, that there's a direct connection. I think that's the biggest thing, and also obviously just an introduction of lots of channels that players can interact with the audience, and where they can connect, right? The advent of social media and all these things, something that wasn't there before. I think if you look into Patrik's days, then the players probably didn't connect with their audience that much, maybe at events, but you didn't have any direct channels to talk to them. So you were a little bit more removed from that. At the same time, you also didn't appear on stage, so your status as a star player was a little bit less than it is now. If you look at what players are now doing on stage, how they're interacting with the audience, so that's definitely the biggest change for us. Also, we've seen teams becoming obviously significantly more professional, right? The days of just 5 guys liking the sport and competing, and then maybe on their own budget traveling to DreamHack events and sleeping with all the other attendees in the halls, that's not something that happens anymore. It's all incredibly professional, and there's lots of organizations behind it with lots of power, lots of followers. So that's definitely also a key change, that it's no longer just, a random bunch of players getting together, but the organizations, 2 of which are here today, have become really massive powers in the last 10 years.
And I think it's probably worth mentioning, I think all of us are, we're involved in the business of esports, but we're all fans of esports. And I'd love it if Patrik and Uli, you could talk a little bit about the event production. If you look at highlights clips, you look at in-stadium experiences, and you compare it to the big halls with rows and rows of computers where people were kind of playing on a much more amateur basis. And now we see, Madison Square Gardens, huge Avicii arenas, all of these incredible arenas filling up, the production values, the light shows, can you just kind of give us surely there are moments when you just sit back and go, I mean, we hoped it would go, we hoped it would go stratospheric, but we really never imagined that we would be getting these kind of arenas with these kind of production values. Can you talk a little bit about how that's been, how that has kind of transitioned over the last few years?
Sure.
Patrik,
I mean, to maybe connect.
start?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, to connect a little bit where I ended, talking about the challenges of lack of standardization, events being cancelled after arriving almost in a new country. So that kind of side has completely vanished, thanks to the likes of ESL and how teams have obviously professionalized, and the learnings of the last 2 decades, essentially. But as someone that is like a sports participant, do I spend a lot of time thinking about the light shows, etc.? That's maybe when my team isn't attending and performing. But noting just the sports element, like Ulrich talked about, the sizes of the rosters, the people we actually send to the team. It's not only the 5 members on the stage, it's an equally big back office, so to speak, with sports performance coaches. You have head coach, you have analysts, and all of these kind of things, right? So it's more like an entourage that goes and attend these tournaments. But surely, post-event signing sessions, ability to meet the fans, I think that's just wonderful, that we have obviously gone from extremely hard to follow, then early stages of Twitch, Own 3D, etc. You can tune in and watch it online with maybe 360p. But these days also, and especially in Counter-Strike, arguably, I'm biased here, but the best spectator sports in esports or sports, I would argue. And you have, the Cologne Dome Arena, don't know the German name, but whatever. You have like tens of thousands of people rocking up and celebrating the best players and teams in the world. And that's 20 years into this title, surely a bunch of iterations since, but that also makes people like myself that is kind of pushing into the fore, is friends around me. They've stopped playing. They barely played a game since 10 years ago or more, but they still now can tune in and watch it and even follow some of the teams from back in the days. So all very exciting, and I'm very proud of what we have accomplished so far.
And Uli, from your point of view, the production expectations from fans now is kind of evolving. How does ESL kind of meet that challenge? I mean, it's exciting, but it's also pretty demanding, I would imagine.
Yeah, but I think overall it's just something that is received very positively also by all those who work here, right? I mean, the fact that we can now do things on that scale, and if you look at the whole timeline of, 20 years ago, right? We were founded in Cologne. Obviously, back then, the Lexus Arena was a distant dream. So we kind of went from people asking, why would anyone do this, esports? What is it even? Why would people play competitive video games? And then slowly progressed to, okay, I get why people do it, but why does anyone earn money with it? Why does anyone do it full time? To why would anyone go to an event for that? Doesn't make sense. It's obviously now filling the biggest arena in Germany, and there's no doubt about it anymore. Nobody questions that anymore. So I think if we're looking at that, then I think there's a lot of pride in the fact that we can now do this on this large scale. We can now have a spider cam in there. We can do production that is on par with what everybody else in that arena is doing. It's no longer just this, hey, we're trying to be like the other entertainment titles, but we're doing the same thing. So I think it's great that the expectation is there, because it just shows that we've progressed so far that the fans are now rightfully demanding this to be produced in a similar fashion as all the other sports, and there's no more this is smaller or not as big. No, rightfully they're expecting this to be on the same level.
So we've talked a little bit now about the kind of the front of house of the experience of being in CSGO and in esports events and tournaments and leagues. I wanted to now talk a little bit about the back of the house and the ESL Pro League project, or I think some people will recognize the phrase the Louvre agreement, which is the agreement that really created a new structure for the management and the development of the ESL Pro League product. So the ESL Pro League product is the 6 weeks, twice a year CSGO league that really is probably the foremost league product in the CSGO space. But the new arrangement, the Louvre agreement that was effectively created around about 2 years ago, was a new project that ESL and 12 of the biggest teams came together and said, let's see if we can try and find a different way of governing these products. There was a discussion, obviously, about how revenues and profits from the Pro League product could be split between the teams that are participating in ESL as the tournament organizer. There was a conversation about how governance could be altered to mirror that, so that there's a greater say in the development and the evolution of the product for the teams. And obviously, one of the great selling points for the teams is that they guarantee themselves a spot in the Pro League every season, twice a year, a great showcase, a great window to showcase not just their talents, their rosters, but also their sponsors and their maturity as a business. So that Louvre agreement was a pretty seismic change for the CSGO space. And I just wanted to kind of understand a little bit about that from ESL's point of view, first of all. If you could just kind of talk a little bit about what was the lead up to the Louvre agreement, which was signed, I think, around February in 2020. What was the road to that decision, and why was it so important for the space?
Yeah, I think, a long time ago, actually, it became quite obvious that there needs to be an alignment between teams and tournament organizers in what is happening. Like I said, I think initially we were hosting a tournament, just a bunch of teams were showing up, but it obviously evolved into something much bigger, where the teams were investing significantly into it. So rightfully so, there needed to be a proper structure that also, sets this up towards the fans in a proper way. So it's not just randomly tournament after tournament every year and it changes all the time. I think that's also not something that's engaging to follow. So around Pro League, we actually started discussing, and Patrik's team was part of that in 2015. And then ultimately in 2016 founded WESA, which was the first alignment where we said, okay, these teams and ESL are aligned. We're running ESL Pro League together, essentially, and we're ultimately sharing in the financials, and we're building a joint business. Now, that was obviously not on the same level as the Louvre agreement, but I think the Louvre agreement then came from the fact that more teams had risen up and wanted to be part of this. And we saw the need for this to encompass a bigger group and also to expand maybe geographically in some shape or form. But ultimately, at the core of it, the understanding is that we're trying to do the same thing, tournament organizers and teams. So ultimately, we should build this business together. And just like it is in other sports, if you look at any other sport, right, then there's the league and the teams this very, very close connection, and they're jointly generating revenue and helping the business grow, but they're also protecting the investments they're making. So as a team, it is really tough if you're investing into players, but then you're at the mercy of maybe getting invited to tournaments, maybe not, and you may not even get any money from the what the tournament is making. So ultimately, that's a really difficult business proposition. And from our side, the same way, right? We want to make sure that there are recognized brands and faces every single year, and we don't go into rotating these all through together, but rather we know that the fans coming to our events, they know that there's an organization that they trust, and even if they change their lineup, even if they have new players, like Fnatic did, they still know that's the Fnatic brand, that's a promise that they're essentially expecting. So the combination of that was really something that we felt was necessary. It was no longer possible to do what was 10 years ago, just Wild West, a bunch of teams here who maybe vanished a year after and they just attended whatever tournament they felt like. That wasn't a sustainable way forward.
And Daniel, thanks for your patience. Daniel from Big, you were not in the original 12 that joined the Pro League project or the Louvre agreement 2 years ago. But when the RFP process was launched at the beginning of this year, obviously you decided to jump in and to bid for one of these available slots in the project. So can you, that puts you in a perfect position to kind of outline for us why Big the business, why Big the roster, why did you decide this was something that you really needed to be part of, that you wanted to get involved in?
Well, given the significant investment, we of course intensely explored and analyzed the business opportunities of such an investment in the ESL Pro League. And with an internal committee and with our investors, of course. And while analyzing the fundamentals of EPL, it very quickly became clear to me that the value must be very high of such a spot. At the same time, we knew that there will be a strong competition for the slots, and it will be even more challenging to win a slot in a subsequent bidding process in the future. So, as you know, if the amount of slots decreases over time, the price will increase naturally. And I told our investors, our shareholders, hey, that's a now or never. Basically, we wanted to make sure that we use all our resources now to win a slot now. And talking about the advantages, of course, the long-term participation, first of all, in the revenues of such a league and other connected ESL Pro League ventures, as well as you mentioned before, the security that we can now guarantee our sponsors to participate in the ESL Pro League and ESL Circuit events for years to come now, were the main factors for our decision to invest in the EPL. And having this guaranteed brand awareness, which is extremely important or valuable for us from a business perspective. That's why I rated the value of the slot very, very high. And I think the competitiveness of the bidding process confirmed that assessment. So basically, to sum it up, if you want to be relevant in CSGO and such a prominent and prestigious esport title, you must be part of the ESL Pro League ecosystem. If you're not part of it, I think you will have a hard time staying competitive in the future or in the long run. And it's just as simple as that. That is why I'm very happy and also felt very relieved when we received the message that we were in. Because I'm sure that the advantages now in the future we will take advantage of those opportunities connected. And from a business perspective, at the end, I think this will significantly increase or accelerate our growth in the future. Yeah.
Thanks, Daniel. And so you mentioned about the Pro League group stages, as you were. This now guarantees you an opportunity to participate in every group stage going forward. and with that comes the revenue share that we've talked about. I think as part of the RFP process, we presented all the bidding teams. I think we started off with around 40 plus teams who were interested in joining this project, with a set of projections that we were willing to be quite bullish about for the forecast and for the horizon of this project. And I think that is what you're referring to a little bit when you're talking about the obvious long-term value and stability that comes from being part of this project. But one of the recent developments that may have kind of not hit the radar of most people who are listening is the addition of the Pro League conference concept. So in the last few weeks, we announced that we were going to add an extra week at the front end of the Pro League in order to create a more formalized and a little bit more structured means through which the teams that are not part of the Pro League project, part of the Louvre agreement, which is now going to be 15 teams by the end of this year, we wanted to give them a really good opportunity to qualify into this 5-week tournament, which is twice a season, as I mentioned. Great visibility, great competition, great place to test yourselves as a business and as a roster. Uli, I'm going to come back to you about the conference concept. Can you just talk us through why you felt at ESL that the conference, that the means of qualification into the Pro League needed to be rejigged, and what are the benefits for teams participating in the conference now?
Yeah, I think one thing that was always obvious to us, that even beyond the core teams that are part of the Louvre agreement, that ESL Pro League means a lot to other teams to be part of it, and to really play in it, in the past, but also currently. So one of the things that we were looking for is how can we make sure that more teams are going to be part of this, and the EPL conference helped us just expand the number of teams that are playing in it, because it's not just a qualification, but essentially the first stage of Pro League, similar to how our Masters Championship events in Katowice and Cologne work, for example. They have a play-in stage, and then there's a main stage, but all the 24 teams are part of the event. So here, the 16 teams playing in the EPL conference, they are part of ESL Pro League, and then some teams make it to the main stage. And having that, and I think that's something that also Daniel mentioned, right? That is something that, to the partners that are supporting you, but also to your players, that's something that is quite important, that you're part of EPL and that you have a chance to make it, and you have a chance to really take number one. So all the teams in EPL conference, no matter where they come from, if they're coming from regional leagues or from national competitions, there's essentially 16 teams from all over the world that represent the strongest in their country. And they are now part of this, and they have a chance to make it to the main stage. Whereas before, we had very isolated layers of qualification. There was a team that came from ESEA, and there were teams that came from other competitions, but it wasn't something that was combined, but rather really stood on its own. And we felt that expanding it and making it larger, but also something that is the first stage of EPL rather than just a qualification mechanism, would give more teams the opportunity to be part of this, and therefore allow more teams to really use this to build that CSGO business around it.
So, Uli, was the guiding principle, because we hear a lot in esports about franchise leagues versus meritocracy qualification leagues. It strikes me that actually the ESL Pro League kind of has the best of both worlds. It has a portion that is kind of franchise, because teams such as Big and Fnatic are now locked into these Pro League seasons. But at the same time, the conference ensures that there is a freshness, there is a pathway to pro, there is a Cinderella story that can still happen for a team to come all the way from the beginning through those 6 weeks and find itself at the top stage fighting for the silverware. Was that a conscious decision?
100%. I think the one thing that we've always stood behind, and that is going to remain this way, is that we don't want a fully franchised system. We don't think it's good in the spirit of competitive integrity. Looking at completely franchised league, there's a lot of teams that are just, somehow bouncing around at the bottom of the table, never making it anywhere. And then obviously in the US, you have the socialized system of they get the first pick next time, so maybe they can be better in the season afterwards. But it doesn't really give a great competitive spirit. So we think that the current system really has the best of both worlds. We think it's quite important for teams that have invested into Counter-Strike for a long time, that keep investing into players, that keep signing lineups, that keep competing, is that their ESL Pro League slots is not at the mercy of a bad season or a bad 6 months. That is quite important. We think that's a key thing that we're always going to stand behind. And the teams that are in EPL, they didn't just buy their slot. I think that's quite important, right? So it was the initial group of teams was the largest CSGO brands, and the teams that have now joined, they also represent teams that have played in ESL Pro League for a long time. So competitiveness was a key portion of that. It wasn't just who had most money. So we think that this guarantees the top Counter-Strike teams their EPL slot and protects them a little bit from, say, short-term fluctuation. But at the same time, we also think that it's important to have the other teams in there, to have the Gambits of this world and the teams that are rising up and have the opportunity to play in there, because that is what keeps things fresh, and we want the opportunity to be there for those teams to make it in, and maybe at some point they join the Louvre agreement. We've seen 100 Thieves drop out. Right, if you look at the next 5 years, then there may be other teams that leave the Louvre agreement at some point. So ultimately, we think it's a good combination. It protects the business and the core investment that the 15 brands that we're going to have in the Louvre agreement that they have made. But at the same time, it still pits them against any other team that can rise up and make it so far. And that will obviously, at some point, potentially be teams that get added to the Louvre agreement. I mean, similar to the teams that were added now, right? They've also competed at the highest level for a long time because of the open system, and now they're part of the group.
So we've spent a bunch of time talking about, the last 2 years. We talked about the RFP process, which was pretty rigorous and took quite a long time, over 6 months. We talked about the conference concept to allow teams to come in. We didn't even get to time to talk about the player council, which has been incorporated into the fabric of the project to make sure that we have that the teams in ESL have access to the group of players that are competing and can share their views, their thoughts, their feedback. I want to look for the last 3 or 4 minutes that we've got left about the future. I'd love to know what each of you guys in a 1 minute or so, what do you think is the most exciting thing about CSGO, the future? Why you're bullish on CSGO and the Pro League project? I'll start with you, Daniel, if that's okay. What are you most looking forward to in the next 12 to 24 months?
Well, to be honest, I'm most looking forward to, of course, to the competition and now being part of a league that brings together the world's best CSGO teams. And of course, we want to take advantage of those opportunities which arise for us now and continue to establish BIG as the best German team. That is our goal from our perspective. So we want to be the FC Bayern in Munich. Competition is very hard, though, of course, but we need to keep pushing ourselves. The Louvre agreement itself is also, of course, hugely important for the sustainability of CSGO as an esports title. So as the ecosystem now offers stakeholders and us teams the chance to continue and invest and grow together as teams and as tournament operator in the game itself, because we are all sitting basically in the same boat, and we need to basically make sure that we steer into the right direction together. Although we are all competitors on the server, at least, I think that is really important, and that is something I'm really looking forward to.
And Patrik, you can't talk about CSGO and its history without talking about Fnatic. What about the future? What are Fnatic most interested and focused on when it comes to the future of CSGO?
Sure. Needless to say, it hasn't been the easiest 12, 16 months for us during COVID lockdown. I think we failed to adapt. So I sincerely look forward to a return to LAN, subject to obviously doing such in a safe and sustainable manner. But yeah, CS is best played in front of an audience, is best played in a filled out arena. So I can't wait for that. Starting to itch in my legs, actually, in terms of not traveling for a long time. So quite excited about, hopefully betterment, but who knows? But yeah, secondly and importantly, it's also down to the kind of finer details, working with the 15 teams and ESL and all other stakeholders on pushing this product forward. I think we've gotten quite far. I think we are the finest FPS league on the planet by a great margin, in fact. with the legacy, with the history, and opportunity-wise, I think we're going to build a sustainable business and a business of longevity if we are able to generate really good content and engagement for our fans, but also that we can strategically think about what role can we play in terms of building out the player base. I think with the addition of Daniel and Big and Furia, we have also another kind of competitive region. These things excite me a lot because I like the esports we are playing in to be as global as possible.
And last word to you, Uli. The future of CSGO from ESL's point of view.
I mean, we're obviously quite excited to finally go back to LAN and to also play in front of an audience. We started doing it, right? We now have first events with players on site, and we've seen the major, we've seen Blast, so everybody knows how exciting it is in front of a crowd, and we've seen record numbers for the majors. I think that kind of shows that CSGO is here to stay, and it wasn't just COVID that boosted the numbers, but it's going to be there long term. So I think really what we want to do is, the things that we've always done best and that we've been most excited about is to bring players together and have them play each other on LAN and have that be the competition and have fans follow in an arena. For that to come back, that really is the one thing that makes the difference. It's just we've seen it this last weekend again. It is different if the players are on stage and if there's thousands of fans following them. So I'm really excited about that. And obviously we now have 15 large teams, and I think sometimes we may forget it a little bit, but since we founded the Louvre agreement, we haven't had a single ESL event in front of fans. Katowice was supposed to be, but then got cancelled. So we've yet to see the full power of this in front of a packed house. So I'm very excited about that.
Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Daniel, Ulrich, and Patrik for joining me. It sounds like CSGO is going from strength to strength. This project is sitting right at the heart of that. And we look forward to everyone from ESI Digital Winter joining ESL events, coming watching the drama and the skills that are on show at these events. But for now, enjoy the rest of the event today and the networking. And I'm signing off. Thank you very much.